In the small town of Amstetten in Lower Austria, a horrifying secret lay hidden behind the unassuming walls of the Fritzl family home. Josef Fritzl, a respected engineer and family man, perpetrated one of the most shocking crimes of the 20th century against his own daughter, Elisabeth Fritzl. This story is not just about the criminal acts of a deeply disturbed individual, but also about the extraordinary lengths he went to conceal his crimes, the psychological and physical toll on his captive daughter and their children, and the ripple effects that shocked their community and the world. The case of Josef Fritzl came to light in 2008, revealing a nightmare that had persisted for 24 years. Elisabeth Fritzl had been held captive by her father in a custom-built cellar under their family home since 1984. During this time, she was subjected to unimaginable abuse, resulting in the birth of 7 children. This story exposes the darkest corners of human behavior, the failure of society to detect signs of the ordeal unfolding within a seemingly normal home, and the legal and psychological aftermath of such a prolonged period of captivity. Josef Fritzl's life began in 1935 in the shadow of the burgeoning conflict that would engulf the world. Born and raised in Amstetten, Austria, his childhood unfolded during a tumultuous era marked by the rise of fascism and the aftermath of World War II. This period was characterized by strict social orders and an emphasis on obedience, elements that were echoed in Fritzl's family life. His mother, known for her authoritarian demeanor, was a dominant influence during his formative years. Her stern discipline shaped much of his outlook and personality, instilling in him a penchant for control and secrecy that would later manifest in horrific ways. After completing his education, Fritzl embarked on a career as an electrical engineer, showing considerable skill in his profession. In 1956, he married Rosemarie, with whom he would eventually have 7 children. On the surface, Fritzl appeared to be a successful and capable man, admired by his peers and viewed as a pillar of the community. He was involved in several business ventures and property developments, accruing respect and financial stability that allowed him to exert even greater control over his family. However, beneath this veneer of respectability, darker aspects of Fritzl's character were simmering. He had a history of criminal behavior that predated his most infamous crimes, including a conviction for attempted rape in the late 1960s. Despite this, his record was later expunged, which enabled him to maintain his status within the community without suspicion. This erasure of his criminal past likely emboldened Fritzl, as it seemed to affirm that he could manipulate societal norms and laws without consequence. Fritzl's control over his family was absolute. His wife, Rosemarie, and their children lived under strict rules and were often subjected to his authoritarian whims. The household was run with military precision, and Fritzl's word was law. Friends and neighbors, while noting Fritzl's domineering personality, saw nothing that would hint at the double life he was leading. As Fritzl's outward life thrived, he began to plot what would become his most horrific act. In the late 1970s, he started the construction of a secret cellar beneath the family home. This project, which he disguised as a nuclear fallout shelter, was equipped with layers of soundproofing and reinforced doors, designed to be a prison from which there would be no escape. It was here that he would later enact the prolonged torment of his daughter, Elisabeth, in a manner that was as calculated as it was cruel. The early life and background of Josef Fritzl paint a picture of a man who was shaped by a strict upbringing, emboldened by early criminal exploits, and skilled enough to construct a facade of normalcy that would deceive even those closest to him. As the 1970s drew to a close, Josef Fritzl's dark ambitions took physical shape beneath his family home in Amstetten. His engineering and technical skills were put to use in a deeply sinister way. The construction of the hidden cellar was disguised as a routine basement expansion. Fritzl, under the guise of building a nuclear fallout shelter, meticulously designed a space that was to become a concealed dungeon. This was not a spur-of-the-moment construction, but a carefully planned and executed project that would take years to complete. The cellar was constructed to be completely self-contained and cut off from the outside world. It was equipped with soundproof walls and a complex series of doors that could only be opened with a code known only to Fritzl. The layout included a network of small rooms, including a kitchen, a bathroom, and a sleeping area, all designed to function without outside assistance for extended periods. The level of detail in the planning was chilling. Air circulation systems were installed to prevent moisture buildup, and the lighting was designed to be minimal, further isolating the space from any sense of normalcy or connection to the outside world. To the outside world, Fritzl appeared to be a devoted family man and a diligent homeowner, constantly improving his property. His construction projects were accepted by his family and neighbors without question, as Fritzl maintained strict control over the access to and knowledge of the basement area. He often worked late into the night, telling his family that he was tending to the maintenance and security of their home. Inside the house, life appeared normal, but the foundation of this normalcy was a lie. Fritzl's wife, Rosemarie, and their children were unaware of the true purpose of the ongoing construction. They lived their lives on the upper floors, oblivious to the transformation occurring beneath them. Fritzl's control over his family was such that no one dared question his activities or the nature of his projects. The completion of the dungeon marked the beginning of a new horrific chapter. In 1984, Fritzl was ready to enact his plan, which he had been formulating for years. He lured his 18-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, into the basement under the pretense of needing help with a door. Once she was inside, he incapacitated her with an ether-soaked towel and secured her in the newly completed dungeon. He then fabricated a story for his family and the community, claiming that Elizabeth had run away to join a religious cult, supporting this lie with letters he forced Elizabeth to write, which he would later receive and share with his family. Thus began one of the most prolonged and severe cases of captivity in recent history. Elizabeth Fritzl's life in the dungeon was a stark contrast to the free world above. She was completely at the mercy of her father, who exercised absolute control over every aspect of her existence from that point onward. The hidden dungeon, a testament to Josef Fritzl's manipulative genius and moral depravity, was her prison for the next 24 years. With Elizabeth confined within the hidden cellar, Josef Fritzl's monstrous plan shifted into a harrowing phase of execution. The world believed Elizabeth had disappeared voluntarily, while in reality, she was trapped beneath her family home, subjected to relentless abuse and manipulation by her own father. From the outset, Fritzl exerted complete control over Elizabeth's environment. The cellar, meticulously designed for confinement, lacked any natural light, with artificial lighting controlled entirely by Fritzl. He established a strict regime wherein Elizabeth's daily life, including sleeping, eating, and personal hygiene, was dictated by his whims. He provided food and necessities irregularly, maintaining a psychological grip that left Elizabeth in a constant state of uncertainty and dependence. The small, cramped rooms of the cellar became Elizabeth's entire world. She was isolated from any human interaction apart from her father, who visited frequently, not just to bring food or other supplies, but also to continue the cycle of abuse that began the day she was imprisoned. Elizabeth had no access to news, no contact with the outside world, and no means of telling time, which further disoriented her and broke down any sense of normalcy or hope of escape. As years passed, the secret beneath the Fritzl home deepened. Elizabeth bore 7 children during her captivity, 3 of whom Fritzl brought upstairs to live with him and his unsuspecting wife, Rosemarie. He concocted stories about how these children had appeared on the doorstep, allegedly left by Elizabeth, who, according to his narrative, was still involved with a religious cult. These children were legally adopted by Fritzl and his wife, growing up in the light of day, unlike their siblings who remained in the cellar. The other 4 children remained underground with Elizabeth. These children's lives began and continued entirely within the confines of the basement. They were raised by Elizabeth in a stark, artificial environment, with no understanding of the world beyond the walls that enclosed them. Fritzl's visits were the only contact they had with another human being outside their immediate family group. Fritzl manipulated the environment to maintain secrecy, installing multiple locks and engineering the cellar to be soundproof. Despite close proximity, neither neighbors nor the rest of the Fritzl family ever heard the sounds of the children or suspected the existence of the hidden dungeon. Fritzl's meticulous planning and the layout of the house, which allowed no line of sight or sound from the cellar, made this horrific deception possible. Throughout this period, Fritzl maintained his facade as a normal citizen and caring family patriarch upstairs. He continued his role in the community and his business, all while managing the secret life in the false narrative he had constructed so carefully. This dual existence continued unchallenged for over 2 decades, with Elizabeth and her children enduring unimaginable hardships just meters below the routine activities of a seemingly ordinary family home. The captivity of Elizabeth Fritzl represents one of the most extreme examples of human depravity and manipulation, hidden behind the everyday facade of a small-town family home. Her ordeal would only come to an end when the health of one of her children forced Fritzl to seek medical help, leading to the unraveling of his carefully constructed web of lies. Elizabeth Fritzl's life in captivity was marked by relentless hardship, manipulation, and abuse. Her daily existence was defined by the strict controls and whims of her father, Josef Fritzl, who visited the cellar frequently, each visit bringing either sustenance, abuse, or both. The psychological and physical toll on Elizabeth was immense, yet she endured and adapted in order to survive and protect her children. The cellar itself was a grim, confined space with basic facilities that were just enough to sustain life, but not enough to provide any comfort. Elizabeth was responsible for the upbringing of her children in these dire conditions. She established a routine that included basic education, teaching them to read and write using whatever materials Fritzl provided. She also instilled in them a sense of normalcy and family, despite the abnormal and cruel circumstances of their existence. The children born in the cellar knew nothing of the outside world. They grew up thinking the cramped, artificially lit rooms were the entirety of the world. Elizabeth told them stories about the outside, creating a picture of a reality they had never seen, which helped fuel their imaginations and a sense of hope. Despite the lack of fresh air, natural light, and space, Elizabeth worked tirelessly to make the environment as healthy and loving as possible under the circumstances. Fritzl's control extended to every aspect of life in the cellar. He monitored their activities through a small set of video cameras and microphones, maintaining his oppressive presence even when physically absent. The fear of his sudden appearances hung constantly over Elizabeth and her children, shaping their behaviors and interactions. Throughout her captivity, Elizabeth faced numerous health challenges, both mental and physical, without proper medical care. The limited diet and lack of sunlight led to deficiencies and health problems in both her and her children. Yet with limited resources, Elizabeth managed to provide care using the rudimentary first aid knowledge she had and the basic supplies Fritzl occasionally brought. The dynamic in the cellar was complex, with Elizabeth trying to foster a sense of family unity and support among the children. They celebrated birthdays and other special occasions using whatever makeshift decorations and toys they could create. These celebrations were small beacons of joy in an otherwise dark existence, moments that allowed them to feel like a normal family, even if just for a short time. As the years passed, the outside world changed, but Elizabeth and her children remained frozen in time, physically and socially isolated in their underground prison. The secrecy of their existence was maintained through Fritzl's meticulous planning and the fear he instilled in Elizabeth. She believed that any attempt to escape or rebel would result in harm to her children, a belief Fritzl reinforced continuously to maintain control. The situation began to change only when one of the children, Kirsten, became seriously ill in 2008. Faced with a medical emergency that he could not ignore or treat, Fritzl was forced to take action that would eventually lead to the discovery of his crimes. This act marked the beginning of the end of Elizabeth's long nightmare, leading to the eventual exposure of one of the most shocking cases of captivity and abuse in modern history. The children born to Elizabeth Fritzl in the hidden cellar faced a reality that was starkly different from the world above them. They were divided into two groups based on the whims of Josef Fritzl: those who were brought up by their mother in the dungeon, and those who were raised by Josef and his wife, Rosemary, upstairs in the light of day. The children who remained with Elizabeth in the cellar, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, knew no other life than the confines of their underground home. They were born into and grew up in isolation, never seeing the sun, never feeling the wind, and never meeting another human besides their immediate family. Elizabeth did her utmost to nurture them, providing education, emotional support, and love, creating a semblance of normalcy within the disturbing reality crafted by Fritzl. In contrast, the children taken to live upstairs, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, were introduced into the world as foundlings, left, according to Fritzl's fabricated stories, at the doorstep by their runaway mother. They attended school, made friends, and lived a seemingly normal life, albeit under the strict and watchful eye of Fritzl. Rosemarie, unaware of the true parentage and the existence of the dungeon below her feet, raised these children as her own, believing her daughter Elizabeth had abandoned them. The dichotomy in the upbringing of these two sets of children created a surreal and fragmented family structure. Those above ground were oblivious to the suffering of their siblings below, while the children in the cellar could only dream of the world their siblings inhabited. Josef Fritzl's meticulous control over both environments allowed him to keep this dual existence secret for decades. He used threats and psychological manipulation to prevent Elizabeth from revealing the truth to her children about their father. Meanwhile, he maintained a facade of normalcy upstairs, deceiving his wife, the community, and even the children he claimed were foundlings. The turning point came when Kirsten, the eldest daughter who had spent her entire life in the cellar, fell critically ill in 2008. Her condition deteriorated to a point where Fritzl could no longer manage it alone with makeshift remedies and limited knowledge. Reluctantly, he brought her above ground for medical attention, claiming to have discovered her outside his house, thus maintaining the story that she was a grandchild abandoned by Elizabeth. The critical condition of Kirsten, one of the children born and raised in the dungeon, served as the catalyst that eventually led to the discovery of Josef Fritzl's heinous crimes. In April 2008, as Kirsten's health rapidly deteriorated, Fritzl had no choice but to take her to the hospital. He concocted a story that she had suddenly appeared at his doorstep, continuing the narrative that Elizabeth had joined a cult and occasionally left her children in his care. Kirsten's arrival at the hospital presented a medical mystery. She was suffering from a range of symptoms that puzzled doctors who were unable to trace any medical history due to the fictitious backstory provided by Fritzl. Her severe condition prompted the medical staff to take immediate and intensive action, but they also insisted on contacting her mother for a more detailed medical history. Fritzl's evasive and contradictory responses raised suspicions among the hospital staff, who then alerted the police. The police began to question the veracity of Fritzl's story, especially given the lack of evidence supporting his claims about Elizabeth's involvement with a cult. They reopened the case of Elizabeth's disappearance, which had remained unresolved despite Fritzl's earlier explanations. As investigators delved deeper, they pressed Fritzl for details and access to Elizabeth. Under mounting pressure and the intense scrutiny of law enforcement, Fritzl's facade began to crumble. He was forced to reveal the existence of the cellar and eventually led the police to the hidden entrance. The discovery was shocking. Behind a small door and down a narrow passage lay the concealed dungeon where Elizabeth and 3 of her children had lived in captivity for 24 years. Upon their rescue, Elizabeth and the children were in a severe state of psychological and physical distress. The authorities took immediate steps to ensure their safety and provide medical care. Elizabeth, initially hesitant to trust anyone, slowly began to recount her ordeal to the police, revealing the full extent of the abuses she and her children had suffered. The news of the discovery shocked the world, and the media descended on Amstetten. The story of the secret cellar, the prolonged captivity, and the abuses committed by Fritzl garnered global attention, sparking debates and discussions about the failures of social and legal systems to detect such crimes. Fritzl was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including incest, rape, false imprisonment, and enslavement. Further investigation revealed the death of one of the children shortly after birth, leading to an additional charge of murder through negligence. The case against him was built on Elizabeth's testimony, the physical evidence from the cellar, and the medical data from the children. The trial of Josef Fritzl was swift and garnered extensive media coverage. He pleaded guilty to all charges except murder, claiming that he had not intended to kill the baby. However, the weight of evidence and the severity of the crimes led to a conviction on all counts. Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment, a sentence he would serve in a facility for the criminally insane, reflecting the grave nature of his offenses and the societal demand for justice. The arrest and subsequent trial of Josef Fritzl closed one of the darkest chapters in criminal history, but it also opened a series of questions about how such a prolonged abuse could remain hidden, the responsibilities of communities and authorities, and the measures needed to prevent similar cases in the future. The case remains a stark reminder of the depths of human depravity and the resilience of those who survive such horrors. The trial of Josef Fritzl was a focal point for global media, drawing attention from around the world due to the gruesome and shocking nature of his crimes. It began in March 2009, less than a year after the discovery of the horrors he had inflicted upon his daughter Elizabeth and their children. Fritzl faced a multitude of charges, including incest, rape, murder, false imprisonment, enslavement, and coercion. As the trial unfolded, the details of Elizabeth's captivity and the conditions she and her children endured were laid bare. Prosecutors presented evidence of the elaborate system of locks and doors Fritzl used to keep the dungeon secure, along with video footage and audio recordings that illustrated the control he maintained over his victims. Elizabeth did not appear in court. Instead, her testimony was relayed through a pre-recorded video, sparing her the trauma of facing her father directly. Her recounting of the events provided a chilling account of her 24 years in captivity. Fritzl's defense was minimal. Initially, he attempted to justify his actions by claiming he was protecting Elizabeth from the outside world and that he took care of her by bringing food and necessities. However, as the evidence of his abuse and the psychological and physical impact on his victims became undeniable, his defense crumbled. On the third day of the trial, after watching Elizabeth's testimony, Fritzl changed his plea to guilty on all charges, including murder by negligence for the death of the newborn who had died in the cellar due to lack of medical care. The court sentenced Josef Fritzl to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. However, due to the severity of his crimes and his advanced age, it is unlikely that Fritzl will ever be released. He was sent to a psychiatric facility for the criminally insane, where he would receive continuous psychological treatment and be kept under strict supervision, ensuring that he could never harm another person again. The aftermath of the Fritzl case had a profound impact not only on the victims, but also on the wider community and society at large. The media coverage and public discourse often focused on how such an atrocity could have occurred undetected for so long in a seemingly normal neighborhood. Questions were raised about the effectiveness of social services, the regulations governing basement constructions, and the societal norms that allow such crimes to go unnoticed. For Elizabeth and her children, the road to recovery was long and fraught with challenges. They were given new identities and relocated to an undisclosed location to begin the process of rebuilding their lives away from the public eye. Psychological and therapeutic support was critical for them, addressing the immense trauma they had suffered. The children who had grown up in the cellar needed extensive therapy and education to adjust to a world they had never really known. The case also prompted legislative changes in Austria and calls for better mechanisms to detect and prevent such abuses. It highlighted the need for improved communication between various social services and more stringent checks on missing persons reports. The Fritzl case led to a broader discussion about the nature of evil and mental health issues, pushing for a deeper understanding and better treatment options for psychological disorders that can lead to such criminal behavior.